Since the beginning, Pokemon has been a game that had gamers dreaming of their ideal experience, almost all of which involved some sort of open world. From fan games to fan concepts, people have tried to replicate that idea. The Pokemon Company themselves even tried out the idea in small sections of the most recent mainline entry, Pokemon Sword and Shield, even having the entire DLC be a free-roaming area with a following Pokemon. A dream come true to many players. But there were other issues with the game, and the majority of it was in the standard Route Town format. But finally, the Breath of the Wild influence on gaming crept its way into Pokemon as well, and Pokemon Legends Arceus was born. A nearly entirely open-world Pokemon experience, sort of, we'll get into it, long before the modern day. A prequel of sorts to showcase an early Sinnoh region. I bought it day one and I didn't put it down until I completed it and its post-game. The first Pokemon game in a long time that made me want to finish its post-game. So as a longtime Pokemon fan, I figured now is as good a time as any to ask the question, is Pokemon Legends Arceus a perfect game? Let's review how we do. I'm Rytoast and I really love gaming. Nearly every game I've played I've loved, the bad ones I've liked, and the glitchy, unplayable messes have given me some of my favorite memories. So instead of reviewing all games, because that would skew really positive, I'm going to go over my favorite games of all time and ask the question, is this a perfect game? We'll find out by going over 5 categories. First, visuals. How does the game's style add or subtract from the game's vibes, and how well do they pull it off? Does graphical fidelity matter in their style? If it does, how is it? Second, audio. How's the mixing? Can I hear dialogue over sound effects? And if not, is that on purpose? Is the voice acting good? Most importantly for me, how's that soundtrack? Is it appropriate for the game? Would I listen to it later on Spotify because it's so good? Third, feel. How them controls? When I want to jump, do I jump where I'd expect to go? If the controls are hard to use, is that the point of the game? How's the UI? Does it make sense? Fourth, plot. How's that dialogue? Do I like the themes? Do I think the vibe they're going for is pulled off well? Is it funny? Is it not supposed to be funny? And finally, for lack of a better term, gushability. A 5 bonus points category to make up for lack of stuff elsewhere or to be a cherry on top. There's nothing technical that I can explain here, but it's how well I would gush about this game. For instance, if a game gets a 10 out of 10 in every other category and 5 points here, it'd be one of my favorite games of all time. I'd talk about it with this warm fuzzy feeling inside and I'd just go on and on and on. If it got a 10 out of 10 in every other category but a 0 in this one, oh yeah, that game. It's very well made. Does that make sense? Finally, if a game manages to get a 40 or more, it goes up to the perfect game lounge to chill with the greats. Every other one gets ranked below. Will we ever find a perfect game? Do you think today's game is going to be a perfect game? Let me know your predictions in the comments below. And while you're down there, there's some really cool buttons that say like and subscribe. You should totally find out what those do by pressing them. Thank you. Now let's get into it. Oh, and spoilers ahead, obviously. Skip to here if you want to know the final verdict of the game with as minimal spoilering as possible. There's also a chapter. I want to begin this section with a large preface. Keep in mind, as we discuss the visuals of the game, that a caveat I have in the explanation of this video is how do the graphics serve the game, not how good are the graphics. I'm in the camp that I don't believe Pokemon games need or should be realistic graphically to be good. I think the games would be a lot better if stylized and cartoonish. That being said, there's some problems here. On one hand, is this the best looking Pokemon game so far? Yes, the models look great, some close-up shots of the environment are spectacular, the Giratina cutscene, outstanding. But on the other hand, most cutscenes are lazy, with animation being substituted with a black screen and sound effects very frequently. A huge problem with this game, probably intentionally placed due to worries over what the Switch can handle, is pop-in. The pop-in in this game is really bad, with occasional Pokemon only being spawned in visually once you're in their visual range. A terrible situation for a stealth-based catching game. All things considered, I think I have to give the visuals here a 7.5. The game is by far the best looking in the series, but frankly that isn't hard when you've only really had one other full console game. When it's good, it's great. All the lore intro cutscenes are wonderful, the character designs are great, I especially love the ancestor concepts in several leading roles, but when it's bad, it's very noticeable and frankly distracting to the game as a whole. Now this is A1 stuff here. The Pokemon series is no stranger to bangin' songs, and Legends Arceus is no stranger to it either. The soundtrack is great, and it has a few bangers that I will be putting on some playlists. the Origin Palkia Dialga fight being a big standout in this regard. Okay, so the soundtrack is good, but what about the characters? Well, the Pokemon cries are all pretty good, and they finally have Pikachu and Eevee doing actual cries and not their anime cries. It sounds so much more natural and normal in the game. There's really only one glaring issue. That's the voice acting. Or the lack of voice acting. Listen, I get it, Pokemon has never had voice acting, and it's not technically necessary in the RPG format that they're going after. But as Pokemon gets more and more advanced, it's going to be stranger and stranger without it. I mean, this game and Sword and Shield had fully animated mouths that matched the dialogue they were saying. It looks so weird to have that without some sort of voice acting. At the very least, they could spring for character noises, like a or something at the beginning of dialogue trees. And don't say, as an RPG, there's too much dialogue. Look at Fire Emblem. That game has like 10 times the amount of dialogue, and it's fully voice acted. Frankly, there's no excuse for this weird silent treatment we get from the characters. All things considered, I think I'll have to give the audio an 8.5. The music is A1, and the Pokemon cries are fixed, and the sound effects are satisfying, and some of the best parts of catching the mons. The lack of voice acting is really what steals this away from 10 scoring, but technically that's not a problem, just a missed opportunity, so it doesn't dock the score too severely. In any other Pokemon game, this section would pretty much only be about balancing and difficulty scaling, but Pokemon Legends Arceus introduces something that no other Pokemon game has thus far: catching mons without battling. Well, unless you count Pokemon Go, but that's different. Oh, and Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, I forgot about those. No hate, they're a great time and my preferred way to enjoy the Kanto region, but I constantly forget they exist. Oh yeah, and the Safari Zone. But except for all that, a huge portion of this game is sneaking around and catching Pokemon, and it works. It feels good to be trying to personally best these creatures, and the game does an excellent job reminding you how dangerous they can be to people. Hell, the characters repeatedly state that you'll probably die out there, which is whack for a Pokemon game, and honestly, after trying to escape from an angry mob of Paris, I see what they mean. To touch on the balancing and difficulty, however, it's pretty great. For one, this is definitely one of the more challenging Pokemon games to date. The Lords provide a good, moderate challenge, and the final fight of the main story is memorable while not being unbeatable. It could use to be a little harder, especially with the lack of actual battling. There is some, but definitely less than most games. But for those of us who want a challenge, Pokemon listened. If you do the post-game story of catching the legendary Pokemon of the region to collect the rest of the Arceus plates with Volo, you're rewarded with, in my opinion, the best boss fight of any Pokemon game. Volo's team is tough, mirroring Cynthia's, and doesn't slouch at all. Then immediately after, you have to take down a Giratina with 2 health bars. You're essentially fighting an 8 Pokemon team of strong mons. Trying to beat this fight without over-leveling took me a long time. The rest of the game's fights are pretty easy to breeze through, however the majority of battles have been replaced by having to rough it through the areas of the game. Once you get the ride Pokemon, it's definitely easy to run past most of this, but for a real challenge, going through on foot can definitely change your experience, not to mention the real risk of whiting out in a space-time rift. The feel here will probably get a 10. No complaints here. You move the way you want to. Catching and sneaking around mons feels great. The balancing and changes made to the turn-based format, abilities, and statuses is really refreshing and changes up battling in a good way. And for the first time in a long time, a Pokemon game has a decent difficulty curve. I can't remember a time where I came up to a boss in Pokemon and legitimately had to leave to level up and catch up before I was able to defeat it. Pokemon has a weird relationship with plot. You could argue that the first game doesn't have one, and that the second game sort of has one as set dressing. However, the third generation onward has hit or miss plots, many people criticizing them when they either get too simplistic or way too convoluted. I never have really minded them, as I play Pokemon mostly for the Pokemon, and a fun dinky plot is enough to get me invested. This game though, I was in it. The characters are so interesting and likable. The drama, the twist villain that honestly caught me by surprise, the twist ninja that really caught me by surprise but made sense since his facial hair was obviously fake. Another side note, I love the parallel in the story where you walk in at the beginning getting shunned and weird looks for being the new guy, but then when you're banished, you go through the same thing by people that are hurt and confused. This story works, and it's one of Pokemon's best. The plot here gets a 9. I know I just went on about how good it is, but I have to dock a point for the character dialogue cutscenes. They're so flat and sometimes boring and dry. Don't get me wrong, it's mostly a visuals and audio problem, but the game can get very dialogue heavy due to the plot, and the combination of no voice acting plus flat conversation visuals on a dialogue heavy game can lead to some really slow parts of the story. If you know me in real life, you know I won't stop talking about this game. Anyone I know who likes Pokemon, I gush about the game with. And those who don't really know anything about Pokemon, I gush about the game too. I have friends who have sworn off Pokemon games, and I've tried to get them to play this. I'm sure Amy's getting sick and tired of hearing me drone on as well. It gets a 5. It has to. I love talking about this game. And so, with the score all tallied, the question remains, is Pokemon Legends Arceus a perfect game? Yes! It squeaks by with a solid, but barely qualifying, 40 out of 40, and it finds itself in the perfect game lounge. It's honestly a really good game, and it feels like an oasis at the end of the Pokemon desert that the fanbase has been wandering through for some years now. It refreshes the franchise and paves the way forward for what a Pokemon can evolve into without being trapped into the same format forever. I only hope they keep making games like it. Come on, Masuda, give us Pokemon Legends Jirachi, it's right there. And honestly, after seeing the Gen 9 trailer, I think they are going in that direction. Also, Fuecoco for life. But I want to hear from you. Do you agree with the ranking? Do you think I'm just a Pokemon fanboy foaming at the mouth over our first decent entry in the franchise? Which is true. Let me know in the comments below. While you're down there, make sure to sneak up on the like button so you can catch it and use it in a life or death combat against me with its evolution, the subscribe button. And remember, as always, stay toasty. Also, I have a Patreon, and if you go over there, there's not much actual content, but you get perks. As much as I can provide, given how small my channel is. But shout out to Emberisk for my first and currently only patron. Thank you so much.